Jingary greetings. Let me briefly introduce myself. I live on Mullinjali country at Gleneagle in the Scenic Rim. I acknowledge the Mullinjali people, the traditional owners of the land on which this video is produced. I have over 40 years of experience in environmental and community activism. After running an electronics design company for over 10 years, I joined the Queensland Government as a community engagement officer working in environmental sciences. That was over 25 years ago. I've been actively involved in community public arts for over 15 years, and more recently have instigated the curation of art meets science exhibitions and artist residencies in my workplace. This research takes a relativist view of the world and will use a social constructivist approach to making meaning of collected data. This exploratory inductive research will look at different real-world activities using a range of methods to understand and generate new knowledge. My research will inform transdisciplinary creative collaboration and curating practice involving public art. It will be a new contribution to knowledge, particularly around the art-science nexus. I anticipate that my practice will stimulate new cultural debate. As a DCI, I will involve 2 research projects. At this point, I expect that these projects will be practice-led research with movement between the theory, evaluation and practice phases. My overall research area is about public, large-scale, long-term, curated art with science projects. My first research project will look worldwide for and examine relevant public art projects. I expect my second research project will focus on just such a public, linear, large-scale and long-term curated art with science project here in Brisbane. My first research question at this point is, what lessons can be learned from examples where art with science and related cultural activities have been intentionally used along a utility corridor to create an additional cultural identity for a city? Some questions to this are, what are the key activities by communities, organisations and government that have influenced such change? What role, if any, did science and the concept of the acquisition of knowledge play in this transformation? How do activities, artefacts, print and online media and resources, marketing activities, institutional arrangements and resources influence the emergence of such an additional cultural identity for a city? What role did the various stakeholders in these examples have in the development of the new cultural identity? Why am I doing this? I first need to explain the background and drivers for my second research project. The Brisbane Knowledge Corridor Route 66 is a Queensland Museum project instigated by me. Over 5 years, the project aims to help make Brisbane one of the world's most visited science, art, culture destinations by providing an enduring new cultural institution. The Brisbane Knowledge Corridor was first identified by the Smart State Council in 2007. The corridor is made up of clusters of knowledge precincts that span the city. The corridor is now served by the iconically named Route 66 bus. Each corridor has 13 knowledge stops connecting most of Brisbane's science, arts and cultural precincts. Some key drivers behind this project are these knowledge precincts and the busways are individually major assets of the city. The corridor project aims to add value to these assets by facilitating collaboration to progressively develop the collective identity of the corridor into a new form of cultural infrastructure. Brisbane Marketing manages the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre, the world's best, and actively and successfully promotes the city as a science conference destination. They are keen to provide more science-related opportunities for conference delegates that connect with our research centres. We have 2 successful World Science Festivals and will have it for another 4 years. The CEO of the Queensland Museum and now the Chief Scientist of Queensland, Professor Suzanne Miller, argues that we need to do more to profile the amazing science that's happening in Queensland and asserts that the Corridor Project represents a fantastic opportunity for doing this. So returning to the research question, what is my theoretical framework? What are the lenses that I'll use to analyse the data I collect? Where is the gap in our knowledge that is worth researching? I indicated earlier that this research will take a relativistic view of the world and use a social constructivist approach. There is also the realistic positivism construct under which most of the science domain of knowledge is based, As the subject of the overall DCI is embedded in the concept of knowledge and the artistically mediated presentation of knowledge, it will be important to consider all aspects of the knowledge construct. Representing these commonly separated constructs are the domains of science and art. Although the overlap may be rejected by many practitioners in both domains, there appears to be a growing recognition or perhaps reaffirmation of the importance of this overlap. This research will focus on activities and discourse where these domains overlap, the art-science nexus. Much of our culture and knowledge is evident in our public spaces. There is a long history and established theory relating to public art. This research will examine the various views on public art practice and curation. It is expected that the concept of dialogic public art practice, as discussed by Grant Kester and others, will be of particular relevance. Most of the public spaces in cities are the result of urban planning processes. Urban planning uses detailed research to define the problem and then present new knowledge or options for resolving the problem. Indeed, the subject of this overall DCI, the Brisbane Knowledge Corridor, was a result of such a major urban planning process. Public art can play an integral role in such solutions. This research will seek to understand the interaction of public art and urban planning with particular reference to corridors. Corridors in this context can be any linear feature. There's some utility such as highways, footpaths, and in this instance a busway. These different constructs and activities provide a number of lenses through which to interpret the likely gap in our knowledge, that is, the curation of public art with science in corridors. The methodology for my first research project will be by case study. I'll use non-random sampling to identify locations as case studies or exemplars to provide the knowledge for a specific context. The sampling will use a purposive selection strategy and mixed methods. The proposed selection strategy will be by snowballing inquiry for locations, which will then be filtered by public art over a large scale with a long-term curatorial intent, with ephemeral and permanent visual arts, digital media, repeated performance, be a linear project and involving art with science. The tools for gathering data from the exemplars will include document review, journals, books, reviews, web pages, reports, social media and similar sources. I'll also do unstructured observations at selected locations. Potential examples where linear corridors at different scales have been intentionally transformed include the East Side Gallery, Bernal Inn, the High Line of New York, the Cheong Waterway in Seoul, and the laneways of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Data collected from the documents, observations and interviews will be stored on the QT data storage facility. I'll do data analysis with meaning-making, thematic and textual analysis, cross-issue and activity mapping. I've not as yet identified my data analysis tools. I may possibly use a simple spreadsheet encoding, as I've done in previous research. I expect to seek QUT ethics approval for interviews with my key informants, for the management and use of sensitive data, for the management of the IP of others, and related to this I may need to gain permission or IP approval from informants to use any copyrighted materials. I may also need to seek permission or extension of permission to use images that may identify individuals. My initial potential uncosted budget line items include observation of international and interstate examples, which might involve travel accommodation and food, publication purchases or copying related to the selected locations, translation services for interviews or documents, and transcription services of interviews. My timeline is definitely a work of progress. I will be switching to part-time after my research project is approved. There may be some interaction with the Brisbane Knowledge Corridor, but will largely be independent of it. I thank you for your time. Good day.